Thank you so much. And thank you again for having us today. I'm Trista Morrison. I'm the Chief Communications Officer at Saniona, and I am so glad to be here today to talk to you about how Saniona is working to improve the lives of rare disease patients through scientific innovation. So we'll dive right in. As you can see here, I will be making forward-looking statements. I just want to make sure that everyone is aware of that. So I want to start by talking to you a little bit about Saniona's vision. We are seeking to build a fully integrated rare disease biopharmaceutical company. And so I'm going to take a step back because some of you who are watching this presentation, I know many of you are very, very knowledgeable about the biotechnology space and life sciences and rare diseases. But for those who are not, I just want to take a step back and define what is a rare disease? So a rare disease is defined in the US as a disease that affects less than 200,000 patients. In the EU, it's less than 5 in 10,000 people. So the idea is that this is a relatively small group of people compared to very common diseases like cardiovascular disease or diabetes, things like that. So you may wonder, why is Saniona focusing on these diseases that affect a smaller number of people? So the reason is that there are actually 7,000 rare diseases that have been identified to date, and less than 10% of them have treatments. There is an incredible unmet need in the rare disease space. A lot of these are very serious diseases, and unfortunately, about half of them impact children. So very significant need here. And because there's such a high unmet need in the rare disease space, the United States and many other governments have put incentives into place to incentivize companies to try to make medicines to treat these diseases. And so in the US, that's orphan drug designation. And I will note that Tesomet, our lead molecule, does have orphan drug designation in both of the two rare diseases that we are moving forward with right now. That's Prader-Willi syndrome and hypothalamic obesity. We'll get into that a bit later in the presentation. But it's important because it allows us to do potentially smaller trials, potentially faster clinical trials. There are tax credits that we are afforded. And importantly, there's market exclusivity if your product is able to get approval. And I also wanted to point out that creating a rare disease company is a proven business model. It is something that has been done in the biopharmaceutical industry by companies like Genzyme. Genzyme was valued at $20 billion US when it was acquired by Sanofi. Sobi, I'm sure you are all familiar with, Alexion, BioMarin, the list goes on. And I just also wanted to note that the team at Saniona, we've worked in many of these companies. Our CEO, Rami, and myself, and our head of HR, we all came from Sobi. Our CFO, Jason, came from Genzyme. So we have experience in building this kind of company. All right, so now I'm going to move on and talk a little bit about the specific rare diseases that we're focusing on with our lead drug, which is called Tesomet. So the first one I want to talk about is hypothalamic obesity. So this is a disease that causes rapid, excessive weight gain, and it's characterized by hyperphagia, which is an uncontrollable hunger. And to understand how uncontrollable this hunger is, I have a quote here from Chelsea, who's one of the moms in the HO community. She says, "We had to start locking cabinets, locking our fridge, restricting food, because if he got his hands on it, he wouldn't stop eating it." So hypothalamic obesity, it's very difficult, not only for the patients, but also for the caregivers. It is one of the most challenging diseases for caregivers to manage. And here, I just wanted to show you some of the photos that some of the patients in the community and the caregivers have been kind enough to share with us and to allow us to share with you. We have Allie and Silas, and you can see their pictures both before and after their diagnosis with hypothalamic obesity. And you can really see that, the shape of their faces, their body has really changed over this very short period of time. So hypothalamic obesity, it occurs usually because there's a brain tumor that's sitting in the hypothalamus, which is the area of the brain that controls hunger and many related feelings. And so when the surgery is done to remove the brain tumor, unfortunately, often the hypothalamus will be damaged, and then hypothalamic obesity, this disease, will result from it. It is rare. We think it impacts up to 25,000 in the US, 40,000 in Europe. There are currently no FDA-approved treatments for this disease, so very significant unmet need. There's actually not even that many companies who have been working in the space. It's a very high unmet need. So moving on here to Prader-Willi syndrome. So Prader-Willi syndrome has some similarities in how it manifests, right? Again, you're going to see the weight gain and the hyperphagia, that uncontrollable hunger. And here's, again, some of the patients who've been kind enough to share their photos and their stories. William, who is an 11-year-old, said, "It really affects me a lot. I can't really control my hunger, and it's just really hard for me to not eat every single second." I also wanted to point out, so this other photo, John, Eric, and Aaron, they live in a home for adults with PWS. Unfortunately, that is often the trajectory of this disease. Because of the uncontrollable hunger, these patients are often not able to live independently. They're also not able to work. If you think about an average work environment, oftentimes, certainly they couldn't work in a restaurant, but even in an office environment, think about how many times there's birthday cake in the kitchen, or someone brought in, muffins in the morning. There's just, food is so a part of our work culture that it makes it very difficult for these folks to work. Again, so this is different than HO in that it is a genetic disease. So people with PWS are born with PWS. It impacts up to 34,000 in the US, 50,000 in Europe. There are no approved treatments for the hyperphagia, which caregivers tell us is the most difficult symptom for them to manage. There is growth hormone approved that does help these patients, but it does not address the hyperphagia. So now I want to tell you what we're doing about it. I want to tell you about our lead drug, which is called Tesomet. So Tesomet is potentially a first-in-class medicine, first of its kind, and it was actually discovered and developed in the labs of our scientists, of Saniona's scientists. Tesomet is a capsule, and it works in the brain, in the reward center and the appetite center of the brain. It increases the levels of three hormones, dopamine, serotonin, and noradrenaline. And what that does is it reduces the craving for food, reduces appetite, and increases the metabolic fat burn. That is how Tesomet is designed to work. So we have completed a phase 2 study already in both hypothalamic obesity and in PWS. So I'll tell you a bit about the HO study. So what we saw in this phase 2 study was on the primary endpoint of body weight. We saw a significant and durable reduction. So let me explain this graph to you. What you see is that both the gray and the blue lines, they start at the same place, right? When the trial begins, the patients who are receiving placebo, that's the gray line, you're going to see them decrease a little bit because they were also getting lifestyle counseling, diet counseling, exercise counseling. But then you see that line come back up. Whereas the group that was receiving Tesomet, you can see that line for body weight dropping lower and lower and lower. Now, in the middle of the graph, what happened was this was the end of the double-blind period of the study. So this is where the statistical analysis is done, and you can see the 6.28% decrease in body weight. I will note that is significant. More than 6% is significant. The FDA actually uses 5% as their threshold for evaluating the significance of obesity drugs in general. So this is well above that. So at that middle line, at the end of the double-blind period, the patients who were on the placebo were switched over to Tesomet, and you can see how that line then starts to decrease. Their body weight does start to decrease, and the folks who continued on Tesomet in the open label period, their body weight stayed relatively low. It did tick up a little bit at the end, we can't be 100% sure, but we do think that there was an effect of the COVID pandemic starting right about the time that the end of this trial was taking place. So now we've just moved into a phase 2B clinical trial in hypothalamic obesity. We just started this trial just earlier this month. It's a double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled, multi-center trial. We have sites going live all over the world, both the US, the EU, the UK, Australia, many other countries. We're going to be looking at many more patients, about 110 patients, and we're going to be evaluating multiple doses of Tesomet. And the primary endpoint is the change in body weight again. And the top line data from that are anticipated in the second half of 2023. So moving on to PWS, I want to tell you a bit about what we saw in our initial phase 2 trial in PWS. So you can see here the data from the adults in the trial. You can see a meaningful reduction in body weight. Again, that's 5.4%. That is above the FDA threshold. And then on hyperphagia, which is the key endpoint in this indication, you can see both a meaningful and a statistically significant reduction in hyperphagia over there. So that's incredibly important. Now, there were parts of this trial where we also studied Tesomet in adolescents. They were very small numbers, but we did see dose-dependent responses in that group as well. And so we've now moved on to our proposed phase 2B clinical trial in Prader-Willi syndrome. This is on track to begin before the end of this year. Again, it's going to be a much larger trial, about 120 patients. And we have sites planned in the US and all over the world. The primary endpoint here is going to be hyperphagia, which is different than the primary endpoint in the HO trial that I mentioned, which is going to be the reduction in body weight. And here, it's a bit of a shorter trial because these endpoints are different. So you can see that we expect top-line data in the first half of 2023. So I want to pause there for a moment because this is what I think makes Saniona very different from a lot of the other biopharmaceutical companies out there. So a lot of companies, this would be the end of the story because a lot of companies are focusing all of their efforts and all of their resources on just one program, one drug, one shot on goal. And what makes Saniona really different is that we have a lot more than that going on. And that is why I was so excited to join the company. It's why so many of us that work here are so excited about Saniona. We have a whole drug discovery engine that's bringing up even more medicines behind Tesomet. So I'll tell you a little bit about our ion channel drug discovery engine. I won't get too much into detail because I know that our time is limited, but ion channels are a very important target in the body. They move ions, which are things like sodium and calcium, in and out of your cells. They're very important, and in fact, there's a number of approved drugs already that target ion channels. It's an 11 billion US dollar industry, but only 20% of ion channels have been tapped as commercial therapeutics. So there's huge unmet need here. A huge ability to tap into ion channels. So Saniona has a database of 130,000 molecules that we've been developing. 20,000 of these are our proprietary ion channel modulators that have been generated over about 20 years of research. And this program has already generated 2 drug candidates, SAN711, which is already in a phase 1 clinical trial, and we think it may be applicable. We have not determined exactly which indication to focus on, but we're narrowing in on neuropathic disorders. SAN903 is in preclinical development and has shown very promising preclinical data in inflammatory and fibrotic disorders. And behind that, many more programs poised to come forward. So that's one of the reasons that we are just very, very excited about the potential. We think we can build a company here that has not just one medicine, but multiple medicines to address multiple rare diseases. So this is what our pipeline looks like right now. You can see Tesomet is in the phase 2b study for hypothalamic obesity, moving into that phase 2b study before the end of this year in Prader-Willi syndrome. In phase 1 there with SAN 711 and preclinical with SAN 903, and then the whole library of compounds behind that. So just a few milestones to highlight. It's been a busy year in 2021. We've already received, like I mentioned, orphan drug designation for Tesomet in both Prader-Willi syndrome and in hypothalamic obesity. I do want to note, we are the first company ever to get orphan drug designation in hypothalamic obesity. I think that's a real testament to the talent of our regulatory and clinical teams who put that package together and helped to educate the FDA on that. So very important milestones there. We also initiated our phase 1 clinical trial of SAN 711. It's a phase 1, so that's in healthy volunteers. And then we just recently, like I mentioned, initiated the phase 2b clinical trial of Tesomet and hypothalamic obesity. And we have yet to, and we will be initiating the phase 2b clinical trial of Tesomet in Prader-Willi syndrome by the end of the year. So a lot has been going on in 2021. And 2022 is going to be quite busy as well. We expect the top line phase 1 data from the SAN 711 trial will be moving SAN 903 into the clinic. We have the potential to get an approval of tesofensine for obesity in Mexico with our partner Medix. Tesofensine is another molecule that we have, and we partnered it with a company in Mexico called Medix, and they have actually completed the phase 3 clinical trials there in general obesity and have submitted it to the Mexican regulatory authorities. Those of you who follow us will know it has been quite delayed by COVID. There have also been changes in leadership in the Mexican regulatory authorities, some questions that were raised that Medix needed to address, but we are looking forward to getting that moving forward and hopefully getting a potential approval in 2022, and also plan to advance a new ion channel modulator from our ion channel drug discovery engine into our pipeline. And I didn't put it on this slide because it's never guaranteed, but I do want to mention, we have all of these molecules, and of course, we're not going to be able to develop all of them ourselves. Some of them may be applicable in non-rare diseases. And so we have a very active business development effort where we are looking to license, out-license, or sell, or put together partnerships for some of these molecules. So, that's very active and underway. We recently hired a chief business officer who is focusing on that. But of course, these deals take time. They're never guaranteed. So I didn't put them on here, but I do want you to know that is something going on. It's a very active effort. And then in 2023, the top line data from our phase 2b trials of Tesomet. So a lot of exciting things to look forward to. And I just want to show you here, this is how we see Saniona growing over time. Excuse me. So beginning with Tesomet for HO and for PWS. Now, some of the analysts who cover us, some independent and some commissioned, they estimate that the peak annual sales of Tesomet could be between $850 million and $1 billion. That's US dollars there. And then when you look at SAN 711, again, because we have not chosen the indication yet, it's difficult to say what the market potential could be. But I can tell you that we have shown positive preclinical data showing that SAN 711 has efficacy along the lines of benzodiazepines such as Valium without some of the very troubling side effects. And that benzodiazepine market is over $1 billion. Again, SAN 903, this is an early program. So again, we haven't chosen the indication yet, but we have seen very good preclinical data in, for example, idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. That is a market that is worth over $2 billion. So these are incredibly large opportunities, and we see this building over time as we move forward and continue to advance one program after another. And then even more as they begin to come out of this library of ion channel modifiers. And then, of course, there's the potential for LCM, which is life cycle management, which is taking these lead molecules and looking at them in additional indications, and of course, business development. So this is what the future looks like to us. And I'll just close here with our investment rationale. I believe we have a very strong proposition. We have this lead medicine, Tesomet, entering phase 2B clinical trials for 2 rare disorders with incredibly high unmet medical need, a deep pipeline of more potential medicines. Behind that, we do have validation from multiple strategic partnerships. I talked a bit about medics, but we also already have ion channel partnerships with companies like Novartis and Boehringer Ingelheim. We have funding into the second half of 2022, and we do have institutional support from some of the largest healthcare investors and most prominent healthcare investors like RA Capital, Pontifax Venture Capital, New Leaf Venture Partners, and others. And there's significant market potential for our current and future product candidates. We definitely believe at Saniona that if we continue to move these programs forward and we are successful, that we can deliver a lot of value both to the patients and to our shareholders. So I'll pause there, and then perhaps we can take questions, if that sounds good.
It sounds great, Trista. Thank you so much for a very interesting presentation. We've gotten a lot of questions about your company, and I think you already gave us answers to a lot of these questions as well. But let's start a bit with the financials, the numbers. Your cash position at the end of the quarter, at the end of Q3, was 425 million. How long, you mentioned this, second half of 2022, will this money last? And also the question is, how will this be allocated?
Sure. So the funding that our current funding is going to be utilized to continue to conduct the phase 2B clinical trials with Tesomet in both PWS and in HO, also to continue to advance SAN 711 through its clinical program, to move forward 903, and to support our operations.
And beyond this, what happens after H1 2022?
Sure. So our current funding will last us into H2 2022. So at some point, we are going to need additional funding, and we are currently evaluating multiple potential strategic opportunities to obtain that funding. I mentioned that something we're focusing a lot on right now is that we recently hired a chief business officer, and that she's focusing on identifying opportunities that we may be able to out-license some of the earlier programs from our ion channel pipeline, or potentially, if you look at Tesomet, we're clearly not going to be in a position to commercialize Tesomet everywhere around the world. We're not that big of a company yet, and wouldn't anticipate growing that big in the next couple of years. And so there may be regions of the world where we can out-license those rights. She's looking at a number of different possibilities. So that's, one way to bring in non-dilutive funding. We recently took out a small loan. That was another way to access some non-dilutive funding. And then, of course, we're also looking at potential other fundings, and we have stated publicly that we are considering a listing on the U.S. NASDAQ as well, and we do continue to evaluate that possibility.
What kind of
there's a lot of possibilities that we're looking at right now. Fortunately, we don't have to make any decisions today. We have some time.
That sounds great. Now, what kind of benefits would it be to be listed at U.S. NASDAQ?
Sure. So, there's a lot of healthcare specialist investors, very large investors, institutional investors who are based in the United States. Some of them are willing to invest in a company that is only listed in another country, but many of them they focus their investments on companies that are also listed in the U.S. And so we believe that if we could list Saniona in the U.S. as well, that would really open the door to more potential investors who may be interested in us.
Now, you mentioned this in the presentation as well, that a lot of independent analysts are predicting peak sales of Tesomet at over $1 billion, and Saniona is valued at 700 million SEK. Why do you think the market has such a conservative view on your market valuation?
So, I will say I get this question a lot via email from our shareholders, and I will say that we don't believe that the incredible progress that we have made recently has been reflected in the share price. I think as all of you investors know, I think there's a number of things that can also impact the share price that have nothing to do with Saniona or our fundamentals or our business. It's been a pretty tough year for Swedish life science companies in general. There's been some bad news from some other companies that has dragged things down, but that's not to place the blame. I'm definitely just acknowledging there's a disconnect between the value that we feel that we've created and how we're seeing that reflected in our current share price. But that said, biotech is risky and it's very long term. It's going to take a while to advance these programs forward to the point where we reach the market and begin to generate revenues with Tesomet. That's a long-term proposition, and it's hard work. There is certainly risk along the way. Every step that we take forward, we are removing risk, right? When we got the orphan drug designation, when we completed the CMC work on our new capsule formulation, when we initiated the trials, as we do each of these things, we're removing risk, but we're not to the end yet. So I think everyone probably knows biotech is a high risk investment. And so I think that probably also factors into, like you mentioned, we do have incredible potential. If we are successful, which we believe we will be, there's incredible potential there, but it's a long road and we got to get there.
So let's dive into the road a bit then. Tesomet, it's contingent on Tesomet's success. All of these revenues, of course, or a lot of them. You are diversified, as you mentioned in the presentation. But what would you say is the next step towards the path of commercialization?
So these two phase 2b trials that we're doing right now, these are an incredibly important step. These are very, they're much larger trials than the initial phase 2 trials that we did before that. Those were very small trials, and they were conducted at 1 or 2 centers. These are much larger trials conducted at many centers around the world. So they're going to give us much more robust data. So this is going to be when we get the data from these phase 2b trials, and that will be coming in 2023. That's going to be an incredibly important step forward for us.
We've gotten a question as well about a new board member. Robert Hoffman joined the board earlier this year, I think. What kind of experience and competence does he bring to Saniona?
Sure. So Robert Hoffman is a financial expert. He actually just recently got appointed as the president and CEO of a U.S. listed company. He is also the chairman of their board, and he is on a number of other boards for U.S. listed companies, usually in the audit committee chair and financial expert position. He has a lot of experience with financials for U.S. listed companies. And so that's why we believed that bringing him on board and bringing in his expertise around that would be incredibly beneficial at this point, because that's something that we are also evaluating.
Trista Morrison, thank you so much for your presentation today, and thank you so much for your answers as well.
Thank you so much for taking the time and allowing us to come and speak to everyone. And you said there were a lot of questions. So if folks had a question and it didn't get answered, feel free to reach out to me. My contact information is on our website, and I'm happy to answer additional questions.
Thank you so much for that.